Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. This is the show that goes beyond the data to explore the people, stories, and insights that drive business success. My name is Dave Bookbinder, and thank you for joining me. Today's guest is someone who's at the forefront of revolutionizing team assessment and development. I'm pleased to welcome JJ Ghatak, who's the founder and CEO of Onloop. JJ, welcome to Behind the Numbers.
Thank you, Dev. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and a little bit about Onloop?
Yeah, sure. So if I think about my identities as a person, A, I'm a Singaporean. B, I had the pleasure of studying at Stanford and getting an MBA. Three, I'm a tech entrepreneur. Four, I'm a CEO coach, and five, I'm an angel investor. So those are some of the identities that define me, and we can go into any one of them or multiple of them, depending on where the conversation goes.
Yeah, we're going to unpack a bunch of that stuff because you're a fascinating guest, and I want you to be able to share as much about your background and journey with our audience as possible. But let's start with OnLoop. So, website
Mm.
says it's a habit-forming, Gen AI-powered goals and feedback platform for high-functioning teams. Tell us what that means in English.
Yeah, so look, OnLoop as a company was born out of personal pain. And right before starting the company, I'd spent 3.5 years at Uber, um, at a time when the company went from 9,000 employees to 27,000 employees. And I'd led teams at a national, regional, and global level. And I absolutely hated this practice called performance management. I tell people that there are a billion knowledge workers in the world, and they all hate one thing, that's performance management. However, if you think about effective management of teams, things like goals and feedback are really important. But what's unfortunately happened in organizations is because we've sort of hidden goals and feedback behind this terrible process called performance management everybody hates. In the process, they've sort of kicked out the baby with the bathwater and hid goals and feedback in the process. And we really set out to reinvent how things like goals and feedback. And over time, we realized there are several other aspects of productivity that every manager needs to manage. And we're like, look, how can we bring the sexy back and make it not something people hate and something people love? And we got lucky that we encountered generative AI along the way. We were quite early to the technology in late 2020. And we have the distinguished privilege of being the first company in the world to automate performance reviews using AI back in 2021. Obviously, if you could look through the records of ChatGPT, I'm sure there's a lot of performance reviews written with ChatGPT today. But what we try and do is really use AI where it's useful to take observations that humans have, and then format it in the right way depending on where the use case is, having a one-on-one conversation, whether it's writing a performance review in certain companies, whether it's writing probation reviews, and make sure those observations are then sort of edited, enhanced with AI for what the use case might be. And we sort of take humans back to what they're good at, which is making observations, and letting AI do the rest.
Yeah, spot on about hating performance reviews, doing them and doing the self-assessments and all that goes with it. You know, the ranking system, which is arbitrary. And then there's, of course, the leaders who say that if you have a 5-point scale, nobody gets a 5 because, well, nobody gets a 5. So you're already at a deficit. Um, your website speaks about the product essentially driving clarity around 5 hierarchical layers.
Yeah.
I want to unpack them if you don't mind, because I think it's interesting to talk about them and how they're weighted and why. If you don't mind, let's go one by one. First one, you talk about the importance of overall well-being.
Mm. Yeah, so look, again, I think context matters. So when we started the company, the real pain point we were trying to tackle is feedback, and that the feedback processes in organizations were broken. But what we realized through our conversations with hundreds of managers, and this was right when COVID happened, and every manager that was used to sort of managing teams, typically in in-person setting, now had to manage teams remotely, and that made effective management a real struggle. And we realized that feedback only matters if certain two conditions are met and in place. And that is clarity around goals that people have, which is the layer above what we call energy. And at a foundational level, people are showing up in a way that is energetic and motivated. And burnout became a important topic that sort of became mainstream with the pandemic. And there's data that shows that apparently 68% of managers are burnt out as of 2024. Um, and if you think about what burnout is running for long amounts of time with very low levels of energy and not feeling a sense of progress. And therefore we felt that for any manager to really assess where a team member is at, right, in a non-judgmental way, is really understanding how full someone's battery is, right? It's not about how stressed someone is or how burnt out someone is look, how full is your battery, right? And most people can give you an answer depending on what's going on for them, and it may not be always about work. There might be a death in the family, or you're going through a sick child's experience. It can be multiple things, but people can tell you where your battery level is, whether that's 20, 40, 60, 80%. And just like your iPhone, right, if your battery's at 40%, you can use it for a while without charging it. But if it's at 10, 15, 20%, if you keep using it, it's going to die if you don't recharge it. And I don't think humans are fundamentally that different, right? And there are things that recharge the batteries and things that deplete the batteries. And therefore, at the foundation, we call it energy. We first called it well-being, but we realized well-being ends up being it becomes a loaded soft word, right? So if you think about CEOs and people who are hardcore, when they hear the word well-being, it feels soft. But I feel like the word energy is very neutral in understanding where someone's energy level is, and that sort of sits at the foundation of our framework.
Yeah, and I love that because you're not to make a gratuitous plug here, but you're literally going behind the numbers to understand what's driving behavior. Because we talk about it a lot here in this program, and I've lived it in my personal life and professional life, where
Yeah,
unfortunately people make judgments, summary and judgment without fact about why somebody's performance is lagging. They think maybe perhaps somebody's disinterested, but you alluded to the idea maybe a death in the family. Yeah, maybe you've got to take care of an elderly parent, and that creates a
hmm
different burden. It changes your commuting times, and it, don't necessarily assume the worst, is why I always say ask the question. So I
totally.
really commend you for digging deeper behind that. You alluded to another piece around targets and projects and skill goals, and that's a very large component in the
Mm.
assessment. Talk about that.
Yeah. So look, we, as I said, when we first started, we really started thinking about feedback. But as we dug in, and this was my experience too, is that goal frameworks that organizations have used, and OKRs being the most famous one that has been a thing the last 10 or 20 years. Unfortunately, OKRs are good at defining things at a company level, but it literally takes 5 MBAs full time to figure out how that cascades down to teams and individuals. And then after 6 or 9 months of work, they go stale in 2 weeks. And so at Uber, we had to submit OKRs. And the
Yeah,
reality is that people typically wrote OKRs at the beginning of the quarter, forgot about them, and then came back at the end of the quarter being like, oh no, we now have to gerrymander the work that we've done and fit it into these things that we set. And we've spoken about the concept of continuous feedback for a while, but we realize that in most modern organizations, goals are also very much dynamic. And if you had to really think about what every knowledge worker is doing, they're either trying to achieve certain targets, they're trying to achieve certain projects, or they're trying to learn new skills. And you could go to every knowledge worker and say, look, what targets, project skills are you working on? And they'd be able to articulate it. Versus if you go to a knowledge worker and say, what are your OKRs? That's a much harder process to do. And it has been incredible in our work to see how many organizations, some of the organizations that we think are amazing organizations, lack goal clarity at a team and individual level. And if you think about what hurts productivity most in organizations, is that lack of goal clarity. And actually, some of this got proven out through an Atlassian State of Teams report that came out in 2024. I recommend the audience go check it out. That it claims that 25 billion hours are lost in the Fortune 500 because people are working on the wrong things,
Hmm.
and that 93% of execs believe that teams can get the work done in half the time if they had goals that were super clear to them, and that often teams spend more than 50% of the times working on things that don't matter. And so goal clarity is one of these things that has been discussed, but time and time again organizations fail at it, and we think that's not because of a lack of intention, but that's because we haven't really thought about goals as both top down and bottoms up, and we haven't seen them as dynamic, and which is why we talk about targets, projects, and skills as the right way to define goals for every level of the organization and make it easy to link through and through. We don't have a problem with OKRs or other frameworks. We can take OKRs and convert them into targets, projects, and skills, but in our experience we haven't seen OKRs travel well through organizations and then not have the longevity to be useful over long amounts of time.
Yeah, for those who aren't initiated and don't know the term OKR, it's objectives and key results. It's another productivity benchmark. It's interesting when you talk about the idea that people generally are not working on tasks that are meaningful. So that's from the lens of the CEO. And when you think
Mm.
of the employee, if they believe that they're not working on something that's meaningful, that task is going to take even that much longer.
No, totally. And actually, this is the exact pain point that one of our customers, Seek Now in the US, came to us with, and they're a 300-person inshore tech organization. And during COVID, they're an operationally heavy org, and they just didn't feel like they had the right visibility into what was happening in the org. And so, exactly to your point, leaders did not think that people were working on exactly the things that mattered. And individuals, if they didn't see how their work impacted the bigger picture, you know, didn't really feel motivated. And so we were able to help them really bring that clarity throughout every level of the org, and then make it very easy to visualize how bigger strategic goals were getting broken down through the org, and how work that every individual was doing was getting laddered up into a very important strategic goal. And the reality is that it's not rocket science, but it requires some level of diligence in getting it done. And doing these things right is not zero effort. But what we try and aspire to is that we make the effort super low, and then make the reward of doing it much greater. And typically, people put in the effort if they think that they do one piece of work and get 10 pieces of outcome out of it. I think people are demotivated when they feel like they got to do all this paperwork, and then it's meaningless. And so that's something we're quite proud of.
Yeah, for sure. I want to bundle the next two components, if you don't mind. One, you talk about celebrating feedback to hone superpowers, and then using feedback to identify blind spots. Let's talk about the superpowers first. And it's interesting that you use the word celebrate.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've seen companies do well at is sort of have some sort of a rewards or recognition practice. So most organizations will have some sort of a bonus pool or a rewards platform where you can praise other people. And what people often forget, that although praise is important, celebrate feedback is really about helping people distill down which behaviors they're really good at. And there's a ton of productivity research that shows that for most high performing individuals, you're better off doubling down on your strengths versus working on your weaknesses. And there's a reason why we put celebrate feedback hierarchically more important than improve feedback. And we don't equate it from an importance standpoint, because true productivity and your zone of genius comes from being very clear on your goals and then how to use your superpowers to achieve those goals. And so when we take an observation, and we tell people that you are doing a team member a equal disservice by saying things like you're doing a great job, as well as saying things like, oh, that deliverable wasn't great. Because in both those cases, you lack specificity. And where good feedback is meaningful is being very specific about the behaviors and the impact of those behaviors. So this is where AI has been a huge aid, because what we can do is we can take people's unstructured inputs, and that can be raw one-on-one notes, it can be a quick voice clip about a meeting that just happened. And what we're able to do is extract specific pieces of feedback out of it, rewrite them following the right structure for how feedback should be written. And we use the SBI framework, which is situation, behavior, impact, and then extract the competencies or values or behaviors that are embedded within that feedback. And that's when feedback becomes truly useful. And you do that for celebrates as well as do that for improves. But typically what we often see in organizations is that people will be not specific about the celebrates. So they'll tell someone they're doing a great job, but when something goes wrong, they'll go into deep specifics about what went wrong. And what we tell managers is that the specificity is equally important, and I would argue even more important around the celebrates than it is around the improves.
Yeah. Do you find that there's revelations around identifying superpowers, both from the employee side and from the leadership side?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece is that people have a ton of recency bias around both, right? So they'll remember a specific event that happened and extrapolate that to people having superpowers or blind spots. But in the product, what we do is we make it very clear to see which behaviors show up the most often. And so it's a simple frequency of, does someone show attention to detail time and time again? Does someone show care for a team member time and time again? And what the revelation really becomes is seeing the consistency and frequency of certain things coming out time and time again, versus relying on a memory of an experience, and then over extrapolating a superpower, a blind spot out of one observation. I think the second piece is, along with recency, people remember experiences that really had an impact on it. So someone did very well on a project, or someone really bombed the meeting. No matter where it happened recently or not, people remember that, right? So it's called the sort of peak end theory of behavioral economics, is that people remember things that happened recently and things they had a heightened feeling out of. And by consistently extracting behaviors from observations, you sort of manage to sort of remove a lot of those biases.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And I guess last but not least in the hierarchy is the ongoing growth through content and something you refer to as micro coaching.
Mm. Yeah. So look, I think, if all of those pieces are in place, right? So if someone's energized and motivated, they have clarity around the goals, they understand the superpowers and blind spots really well. Ultimately, what matters is a sense that people are learning and growing continuously, right? So we talk a lot about continuous learning and continuous development. And in fact, when I interview managers around what do you think is the right role of a manager, they often jump to that piece around, oh, I really want to help my team member learn and grow. And so we acknowledge how important a part it is of productivity and performance, but it's really the cherry on the top, and really becomes relevant if the other pieces are in place. And the biggest mistake we see managers make, is that if they have a low performer on the team, they will often jump directly to improve feedback. So they'll be very clear about, oh, this is what you're doing wrong. But really, what that person needs is help more foundationally in really understanding where their energy is and do they really understand their goals clearly. And when they have a high performer, they will do a really good job in celebrating them, but they won't give them enough improved feedback and won't give them enough opportunities to learn and grow. And that high performer will often leave because they think they're not learning and growing at the pace that they want. And so that often is an aha moment when we talk to managers, is that the way to really reward your high performers is by giving them good constructive feedback, and giving them opportunities for growth, which sit at the top of that pyramid. And the way to really help lower performers is to really clarify where the energy is, how we can energize them more, and give them goal clarity.
Yeah, and this is a great framework because it's somewhat easy to give good feedback, notwithstanding the fact that maybe we struggle with how to structure it to making it more meaningful or best meaningful. But we oftentimes really have a problem with delivering the tougher messages for
Yeah,
the poorer performers and helping them up the curve.
yeah. But again, often if you're a poor performer, the issue might be more foundational, and you might realize that they're actually not clear on the goals. And you end up moving further down the pyramid than at the improved feedback layer.
Yeah, so I don't know if you have any data around it, but I'd be curious to know what percentage of the time it's more not necessarily the employee per se, but the fact that they're not being given the clarity and goals and guardrails. That's where they should be headed.
Yeah, I think there's decent Gallup research on sort of how poor feedback mechanisms in organizations tend to be, and how many employees don't feel like they receive regular feedback from the manager, and we strongly believe that's not for a lack of good intention. It's because the practices that we've adopted in organizations have not made it easy or compelling or sort of enjoyable to do feedback in the right way. And frankly, that data hasn't got better. And you'll see articles dating back 10, 15, 20 years on performance management being broken. And we think that sort of both the shift to hybrid work, as well as sort of generative AI, are two large catalysts that give us hope that we can solve this problem, although it's been an age-old problem for a very long time.
Yeah, for sure. I want to shift gears just a little bit to speak a little bit about your angel investor background. I'd be curious for you to share that with the audience, and also as an angel investor, how important is management and leadership in your assessment of the businesses that you're looking at?
Yeah, so look, I think angel investment has been typically seen as an early stage investment sport, right? So typically people will angel invest at a pre-seed or seed level of a company when the organization is sort of quite nascent, right? So, and there may not be a large management team, in which case the focus becomes on the founder, and your ability to assess whether that founder has what it takes to go build a very large company over time. And invariably, that's about assessing a founder's ability to hire, retain, and grow a successful team and a very large successful team, right? So at Stanford, we used to often talk about as a leader, it's super important to understand why someone should follow you, right? Because ultimately, if you're not able to inspire someone to follow you, it becomes very hard to be a leader of a large and growing organizations. And there's a reason as to why founders who might be charismatic or are able to tell a powerful narrative tend to fundraise better, and that's because people sort of are able to imagine that person going on and leading a very large organization. Whereas if they can't see that at the nascent stage, it's hard to predict, right? So I think in early stage investing, you're probably more assessing the leadership capabilities of the founder or the founding team versus the managerial capabilities, and those are often two different things. Um, but more and more people can now angel invest, um, sort of, in later stages too. My wife and I just sort of made a small investment in a company called Gecko Robotics in the US, and they're $1 billion company but doing an amazing amount of work in the defense space, and we expect them to get a whole lot larger, in which case there is more of a fleshed out organization, and you can sort of look at the backgrounds of folks, and sort of how those orgs have evolved over time in terms of assessing the managerial capability. But one of the things that I tell people are very, very different. Like, people often confuse leadership and management. But they're two very different things, and leadership is often about the art, but management's really about the science, and management's really about the execution of getting things done, and then being able to sort of break it down to sizable pieces. But I think in most forms of angel investing, you're really trying to understand the person or the team behind it.
Yeah, really good stuff there. And I think a lot of folks can relate to and understand the idea of the charismatic leader when they think about public company CEOs who are visible, almost celebrity status. But I'd like you to offer some advice for the leaders out there who are listening to the program who may not feel like they're charismatic, but may represent themselves as more authentic and maybe in their mind feel, and I
Mm.
emphasize feel, less polished, if you will.
Yeah, so look, often I think good leadership and good management can be at odds. And what often works really well is when you marry the two together, right? And the most sort of iconic case study of this is the Steve Jobs Tim Cook combination, right? Where Steve Jobs was your visionary leader, and Tim Cook was your incredible manager, that was really able to execute on that mission. And today, obviously, after Steve Jobs passing, Tim Cook has taken over the company, and has led the company. And actually, I think Tim Cook's done a phenomenal job in leading the company, um, upon Steve Jobs' passing. But however, today Apple might be struggling a little bit because we've reached an inflection point in technology where you sort of need to reinvent again, right? Whereby the sort of on the explore exploit spectrum, companies are having to go back into explore mode because the rules of the game have completely changed. And I think companies sort of need a combination of both. It also depends on what you're building, or what the sort of risk level is in a business, right? So if you're in healthcare, for instance, I don't think people don't care about charisma. The question is, how good is your science, and how good are you at executing on the things that you say? We've all seen what happened with Theranos, and exceptional inspirational leadership, but not great execution and management behind it. But if you're trying to build WeWork and getting people to get very excited about corporate real estate, right? Maybe the charisma wins, and WeWork would not be WeWork without the charisma of Adam Newman, although that comes with a whole set of issues. I think also it depends on what industry you're in. But I've seen all sorts of founders really succeed, and the reality is, ultimately, once you're past the initial stages, people are backing traction, and people are backing execution. And in my experience, a lot of charismatic leaders often miss that sort of core, really good grind of day-to-day management. And if you are one of those managers who run a company, like, often you might need a charismatic chief business officer who's out there wowing investors, right? So and sort of leading a company is a team sport. And I think what is most important is really being self-aware of your superpowers and blind spots, and then looking at your blind spots and building a management team around you that works for you. And so it goes back to really sort of understanding who you are and what you're trying to achieve, and what you might need to beef up through someone you hire, versus beating yourself up about not having that skill set.
Yeah, and that's a great point to emphasize when you say that leading a company is a team sport. JJ, we're getting close to the end of the program here, but I want to make sure I touch on this important thing, especially now where we are with artificial intelligence in the workplace and becoming more adopted inside organizations. And you did a talk on 10 predictions on the future of work, and you don't need to share all 10, but I would love it if you would share with the audience a couple, or at least one, depending. I'll let you decide how many you want to share. You got free reign here.
Yeah, so look, I'm a techno optimist, right? And therefore I believe that as a result of technology, the future is better and brighter. However, I also think that we still continue to underestimate how foundational and how wide ranging the impact of AI, and especially generative AI, will be. And the best analogy that I've found is electricity, right? And if you think about our lives today, there is zero parts of our life that we can imagine without electricity, including sleep and sort of, you know, the conditions we sleep under today, right? So I think one of the predictions that I make is, look, the only human skill that will be important in knowledge work after AI has really reached scale is judgment, and sort of your ability to make judgment calls in situations, because AI will get really good at giving you the data, at making the right prediction. So I actually think it's judgment, not decision making, because I think AI will make better decisions. But I think that if you think about amazing companies or amazing countries, what happens in its journey is strong leaders making judgment calls when the data might say that you should give up or not take risk, and people take leaps of faith, right? And the other thing that alongside judgment is becoming more commonplace to talk about is taste, right? So whether you define a good product or a good experience is whether you have taste or not, because if you have good taste, you can get the machines to do and bring that vision to life. And so I think sort of the things that we've typically looked at, soft skills, will become the only skills, and the things that we sort of talk about, hard skills, will become what computers do. Um, the other one that I talk about is leveling the playing field around eloquence bias. And I coined a term called eloquence bias, which basically, and I think that sits at the base of all sort of gaps in professional outcomes, be it for men and women, be it for introverts, extroverts, it's minorities versus non-minorities. Is that whoever sounds better and screams louder at the workplace gets better outcomes. And typically, I think Americans have been globally immensely successful because they're eloquent, right? And if you look at a Chinese entrepreneur or a Korean entrepreneur or a Japanese entrepreneur, often their success is impeded by the fact that they can't be eloquent, right? And I think AI will give everybody eloquent superpowers, and you'll be able to articulate your thoughts and your arguments and your vision with AI in a way that puts a level playing field. And so, to your point previously about that manager or the CEO who's not as charismatic, I think that problem's going to go away, and we'll be able to use the power of AI to show up in a way that is more energetic and more charismatic. And so, I think it will lead to a fairer world because the people who are really good will win more. I don't think it'll ever become completely fair, but fairer than it is today. But I have the whole talk on YouTube. You can just look up my name and the predictions on future work, and you'll find it pretty easily.
Really, really fascinating stuff. It sounds like one of the big takeaways that I got from that little dissertation on the predictions is that being human ultimately can become the ultimate superpower in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that, you know, building relationships and knowing how to connect with other humans is going to be a skill set that no AI will take away from people. It's not about being empathetic, but we are tribal as a species, and that is not going to change no matter how much tech that comes in. And so I talk about the term social fitness as a corollary to physical fitness or mental fitness. And one of the issues that I have with the sort of cell phone generation that's glued to a screen all the time is that people are forgetting on just human connection. And you know, even in my career right now, I sit at a crossroads where I'm like, look, do I want to triple down on AI, or do I want to triple down on all the things that are human in a world of AI? And I think you've hit a real nerve when you say, I think the things that will make you the most successful in the world of AI are the things that are most human about you.
Fascinating stuff. JJ, before we go, please do tell the audience how they can find you, how they can connect with you, learn more about you and Onloop.
Yeah, look, there's a ton of content on Google or I guess ChatGPT. I made Perplexity run a diligence report on me. So if you tell Perplexity run a diligence on JJ Ghatak, will tell you what I think about the world, which is mind blowing. But if you want to reach out to me, I'm quite easy to find on LinkedIn. I really like hearing from people around the world, and I may not always respond, but I read everything that's sent through. So LinkedIn's the best way to find me and get in touch.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Numbers.
No, thank you, Dave. It's been a lot of fun.
And it was a lot of fun for me too. And thank you out there for tuning into Behind the Numbers. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do take a moment, leave us a comment or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Your feedback helps us grow and bring you more great content going forward. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. Until next time, I am Dave Bookbinder, reminding you that the numbers tell the story, but the people bring it to life. Take care, everybody.